Okay, let's go. Zeh Netto, let's go. You can start.
Hello, everybody. We are really thrilled to have here with us Fiedel, Brad Fiedel, a great composer, and we are very happy that he accept our invitation here at the Musimagem Festival, the ninth Musimagem Festival. And welcome, Brad. We're
Oh,
here.
thank you. It's an honor to be here.
We are honored. We are thrilled too. We have a lot of good questions for you, we hope.
Oh, good.
And we here with João Batista, our member
Hello.
of Musimagem too, and our special, how to say that, ambassador, international ambassador, because he's a very good guy for communicating with people around the world, and was João who introduced it, Mr. Brad to us. And well, let's go for it, guys.
Right.
May I start, João? May I start with a question?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, well,
You. Okay,
yes,
please.
just a sec.
Please.
Mr. I stopped calling you Mr. because we are almost the same age.
That is fine.
I'm from 59 and you are from 51, I think so, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. How
Hard to
was
believe.
sorry?
It's hard to believe how the
It's
time goes.
but and you sound very young, and it's good.
Thank you.
You do. Talk a little bit about your background in music, how it starts in your life, music, and a second question, when it happens, uh, this turning point, when it happens that you start to think about to make music professionally for movies.
Okay, those are two big questions.
Yes.
I grew up in a crazy, well, it wasn't just a home, it was a school. My mother was a dancer, my father was a musician, and they created a school in an area on Long Island about an hour from New York City or a little bit more. And I grew up in the middle of all this crazy creativity and somewhat bohemian. All the drama teacher and the painting teacher and all these people came from New York, and they were, pretty wild characters. And I just grew up in the middle of that. And it was all about, a lot of it was about instilling in children the idea that whether we want to be an artist professionally or not doesn't matter. We all have this creativity inside of us that we can express. And they help to strengthen that muscle, in kids by a lot of improvisation. Like you would come into the music class and the first thing you had to do was introduce yourself by singing your name. I mean, just free, my name is Brad, like that. So it was just like this flow and I was very lucky. I was just kind of programmed to be a creative person. So I can't claim I didn't fall far from the tree on that score. The transition was, well, let me go back. So in that environment, I heard all kinds of music all the time. My dad was very eclectic. I think one of the things I realized recently that even maybe have people ask what informed a certain score, what was your influence? And I don't listen that much in the present when I'm on an assignment. I don't like refer to other music because I like to be kind of fresh in my mind. But I realized that when I was a kid, my dad loved the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra and Percussion.
Wow.
And it's a wild, if you've ever heard it, it's a wild piece. But this idea of percussion being instruments, I think influenced me on some of those kinds of scores that I did later. So I was a teenager. I rebelled from my parents. I stopped practicing the piano. My dad was my teacher, which was a big mistake. Never, it's like teaching your kid how to drive. not a good idea.
That
So
never works.
what's interesting, he was Juilliard master degree. I
Wow.
totally rebelled and became a rock and roll singer-songwriter and refused to practice. I never, at that point in my life, I didn't really learn how to read music because I just pushed it all away and just wanted to go on my own instincts and really be a rock and roll star and get the girls. You know, that was
Yeah.
that was the main idea. I wasn't an athlete, right? I wasn't a football player or whatever. So the other option was to be a rock and roller. So I did that for a number of years and actually had some success. I was only like 19, 20 years old. And I don't know if your audience knows who Clive Davis is, but he's one of the biggest record executives ever and discovered. So I got to audition, and Paul Simon, the songwriter, signed me. He was signing just a handful of young writers to his publishing company. So I did that for a year or so. So things were moving, but I wasn't making a living. And I really didn't want to do other work if I could, you know, like real work, if I could.
Real work.
I didn't want to get a real job, you know. So there was a certain point where my girlfriend at the time saw an ad in the Village Voice, which was the Greenwich Village newspaper. And the ad said, classical composer wanted for children's films. I wasn't a classical composer, but I went down there and I had some songs on tape and I played them the songs, and they said, well, you know what? We want each of these educational films to have a song that kind of wraps up. We're trying to teach kids about behavior and not bullying and being kind. And, you know, they were instructional. And we want a song to kind of wrap up the moral of each story. So we love your songs. And I said, well, I can write the other music. You know, I've created music for dance many times. I'll just, you know. So they hired me. And that was the first paid job that I had, writing music for images and stories. And cool. I kind of had a realization, wow, this is great. I mean, I was lucky if I made $50 playing in a bar, my song, maybe, right? And all of a sudden I'm getting paid like hundreds of dollars for this little 12-minute film, you know? So I didn't give up on the rock and roll thing, but that was in the back of my mind. And then I got a gig playing keyboards for a while for Daryl Hall and John Oates, Hall and Oates. And I toured with them for 6 months. And they were just becoming a big act at that time. And the lifestyle was not my thing. I'm like a farmer. I wake up early in the morning. That's why I love surfing, because I surf early in the morning.
Oh, me too. And I surf. I'm an old surfer too. Oh, cool. Yeah. Let's go to Santa Monica and share some waves one of these days.
Dawn Patrol. That's me. I actually designed and built a surf hotel on the Pacific coast of Mexico. When I left Hollywood, I learned to surf, and I'll send you the info. But you can see I got to play architect. It was a lot of fun. So anyway, the bottom line is I didn't like the lifestyle very much. Back then there wasn't internet, there wasn't good portable keyboard. So I'd wake up in a hotel in Ohio somewhere, and nobody else was awake till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had like nothing to do. And I realized, yeah, if I could become a star like they were becoming a star, and it was my own music, it would be worth the sacrifice. Sure. But to support someone else's music, which I was lucky. They were the one band I played with that was notable, and they were very nice guys, and their music was tasty. It was all good. But I realized at the same time, an old friend of mine made an independent film. It was called Apple Pie. It was a New York film. I don't even know if it's available anywhere. But he asked me to write this. He asked me to write the score for it. And I wrote the score, and there was a dance scene in the movie that they shot to James Brown, but of course they couldn't afford the license fee for James Brown. So they asked me to replace it. And I thought, oh, I need some good funky. And I turned to Daryl and John and the guys we were on the road with. I said, you want to come do a union session for a little movie? And they said, sure. So they came for Union Scale. and played this big dance sequence. Is me and Daryl and John. It's basically Daryl Hall, John Oates band just jamming on my first score ever. So that was fun.
Cool.
Anyway, so that's basically then I just realized when I was on tour and I scored my first film and I realized that I liked that life better, that I wasn't really getting the opportunity to be in the rock world with my own compositions, but in film I could write all different kinds of music. See, the pressure then, especially then, was hit songs. Whatever the hit song was, you were supposed to sound like that. If it was James Taylor, they wanted the next James Taylor. If it was Elton John, so there was a lot of pressure. And I found, especially in the early days in New York, I got to write the craziest music for these small movies. And then I got to do some bigger television films. And people gave me a lot of freedom to write what I wanted to write. And none of it has anything to do with Terminator, by the way, which is
okay.
Because really I had scored my first film in 75 and Terminator was 84. And people think that's when it started, but I had a lot of experience by the time I met Jim Cameron.
Cool.
So, tell me again what your second question was. Oh, no, it was background and you made okay, got it.
You got it. You got it. You nailed it. You nailed it. I did some research about you too, and that's why I asked you about your background, because I knew that you had a lot of experience before, Terminator. Let's say, because Terminator sounds like something that really was a breakthrough in your career. I think so.
No, in 1980, just to give you an example, and it's fun to get to talk about this because it's not that it's not known, but it's just so far away from what people think, right? So in 1980, one of my first orchestra scores was The Voyage of the Mayflower to America. It was a Thanksgiving special for America, starring Anthony Hopkins as the captain of the Mayflower.
No way.
So full orchestra period piece, 1980.
Wow, fantastic.
And that same year, I did a romantic comedy written by the same team, Ruth Gordon and Garson Kanin, who wrote all the Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn movies, right?
Fantastic.
And then I got to do Playing for Time, which Vanessa Redgrave won the Emmy for, about a French singer in Auschwitz. That was in like a year and a half, those three projects. So that was in the, early 80s. So yeah, it's been quite a journey, and I've been very, very lucky to have that background. And things were a little freer back then for a composer. The temp track thing didn't exist so much. A filmmaker would come to you and say, here's my film, do your thing. Of course, you have to present your ideas and get them approved, but it wasn't, we like this, do something like this, And that includes Jim Cameron. He didn't do that. I got to watch that film, Terminator, without any temp track, no music.
That's fantastic.
Because I don't think I would have woken up the next morning, because the Terminator score isn't like other stuff I'd done before. It wasn't like I just kept doing, it came out of me as a subconscious reaction to the film. So anyway.
Cool. João, make your questions, because if you let me, I speak all the time.
Only you speak. About this that you talk now, the Terminator. I discovered the Terminator many years ago on video, in record video. And I always noted for me that the Terminator is a symphonic soundtrack, but there is a very strong pulsation that reminds me of the pulsation, the energy of rock. Do you agree or disagree of this my sensation that there is a rock energy in the symphonic soundtrack of Terminator? And and if yes, I think that that was one of the first soundtracks that broke this kind of sound that I remember. Do you agree?
Interesting. I never consciously thought about rock. I really thought about machines, but there's a connection there, right? So I wanted I wanted it to be like the pulse of this machine. So that boom, 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 boom.
Yes.
It's the heartbeat. And then everything, ba ba bum, ba bum, everything generates from that, right? So I never thought of it as rock. In fact, but of course the energy is similar because what other music has that kind of driving force? But what was interesting is that I discovered Jim really, really, I mean, it's so funny because it's the score I was lucky to be there for. There aren't many composers that get to work, especially pretty early in my career, work on something that becomes such a part of the culture that's so well done. Because there's a lot of films that you give your heart to and they're not great, you know, so they don't, not that many people see them or whatever. But first of all, I was really lucky that we came together on that. And on the first one, and then of course the second one kind of, you know, it was a while later, but we knew that we wanted to work together on that. And we made some interesting evolutions from the first to the second. As far as, to me, the second one is more symphonic, Terminator 2.
Yes.
First one is a little bit
Really?
more, you know, I was using a lot of early sequencing, drum machines, very synth, all electronic.
All electronic, yes.
There was a couple of samples in it, but it was mostly just oscillator-driven electronic. And then the second one, really, we almost did it with an orchestra. And I was working with the sounds, and we decided that aside from the schedule, and he was doing these crazy visual effects that no one had ever done before. And at that point, they took way longer than anybody thought they would. So I never got the locked, timed out scenes till the last minute. So if we had been working back then on analog, remember, no digital,
yeah,
with an orchestra, it would have been a disaster, right?
Sure.
So I just kept working and updating and working. And anyway, the thing about the rock thing, to go back to that, is rock at that point, there are exceptions, but it was a lot of 4/4 time, right? Very square. And I decided in that score, two things that I didn't really decide, they just happened. What would happen with me is I would try something and it would sound wrong, and then I would try something else and it would sound right. People always attach, looking back historically to different artists, this intellectual process, when a lot of the time it's just trusting your gut, right? Trusting your instincts. It was a lot for me. But when I look back, some of the realizations I can remember is that I realized he wanted forward propulsion nonstop on the first one, especially. And what came out of me instinctually was not to do a lot of 4/4 time, because 4/4 time sits, has like gravity, right? Sure. So in certain chase scenes, whatever, it's 5/4, 7/4. You know, it's always falling forward. And he's interesting too, because he really didn't want much melodic stuff. And I remember there was one thing, I think it was the Escape from the Police Station, where I put in this heroic French horny type synth sound to show like they made it, they got out, da-da-da, the hero, you know? No. He said, I don't want, as a director, he's very, very conscious on all levels, as you know. So he said, I don't want the audience to be functioning in that part of their brain where the intellect says, there's the melody, this is heroic, oh boy, they survived, the music's telling me. He said, no, just bam, 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 just keep moving it. So a lot of that came from his direction. I mean, the music all came from me, but the few times I tried to slip in melody, sometimes they survive, like the love scene, which is solo piano, just about, right? But anyway, so it was interesting. And the other thing, referring to your rock question, is there was starting to be more rock and roll in movies and TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I got really tired of electric guitar. And I had this, actually, I started experimenting with him on a few scores before that, but my dear friend Ross Levinson, amazing electric violinist. So what the guitar would have done, I brought in violin, because especially then it was, now there's so many different effects and stuff you can use on the guitar, but back then the guitar always pretty much sounded like a guitar, where the violin could sound like shrieking brakes, it could sound like anything. So he was a key part of staying away from a cliche of rock and roll for the score. Probably the closest thing is the drum machine.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's like an identifiable part of rock and roll at that time. Now, all the sounds that I felt like are from the past, they're so back now, the analog synths and the drum machines and all that stuff.
Yes.
Yes. Zeh Netto, can I make
Sure.
another question about?
Sure.
You made the soundtrack for 3 movies of James Cameron.
Right.
That is, I suppose, a very detail-oriented director. How was the experience of work with James Cameron 3 times?
I'm trying to
Easy,
think who it
not
was.
easy.
Another very, I can't really say this. I'm not going to say this, but anyway, yes, I've been asked that question before in a very picturesque way once, by somebody who also worked with him on something. But anyway, he literally said, I don't know how to say it politely, but we met for the first time in a group gathering, and he said, "Wow, you're not, I'm like 5'9", or I used to be before I shrank, But,
we all.
yeah, always, right? So he came in, he shook my hand, he said, everyone might not realize it, but you have the biggest cojones,
Cojones.
in this room, because of exactly what you're saying. But I had a very unique experience with Jim Cameron that I don't think is common in the experiences of people who have worked with him. The good news is, when we started together, he was kind of new. He had much more experience in the industry than he had, having done my first film like 9 years before that. So he was open because of that. And we worked one-on-one. He would come to my studio and I would show him things, and I think I established trust because he showed me the film in my studio, and he came back like 2 days later and I had the main theme. And when you're working with someone like that, if you get it and you deliver that quickly, thank you, because it doesn't always work out that way,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
But it just happened to click, and it clicked for me, then it clicked for him. And, there's always that moment in my studio. I used to sit at the mixing board, and the director, producer, whoever was there would sit behind me, and I'd play them something. And it was like I had this radar behind my head, just like saying, oh, I hope they get it. Because if they don't get it, then you're off into plan B, plan C. Everybody starts to feel insecure and gets nervous and not trust you. So one of the main things about being a composer that I found to get any freedom to do a unique score is you got to hit a home run, like on the first pitch, basically. So I got very lucky with that. And then he would come, and, I hardly remember in the original, in the first Terminator, him not just pretty much liking whatever I played for him. He would have that influence of saying, keep it visceral, don't get heady with melody or composition. It got a little bit, of course. So by the time we got to Terminator 2 now, he's a big guy now. He's making the most expensive movie ever made at that point. And there's enormous pressure on him from Carolco, the people who were behind it and everything. So things had shifted. In fact, he made a joke once, because I'm still working out of my studio in a converted garage in LA. And he walked in one point, he said, Brad, do you realize you're scoring the most expensive movie ever made in your garage? So that movie, I think he got more sophisticated musically, which for some directors can be really a pain in the butt if they think they really know music, because then they talk to you musically. I said, talk to me like an actor. Give me motivation. Don't tell me this is funny, you need a xylophone, which actually a producer told me that once. So he was a little more specific. And I remember one big cue that he did not like my direction. Literally out of that, there's like almost, 100 and something minutes of music.
Wow.
It was the canal chase. And what was wrong wasn't wrong. It was a good piece of music, but it wasn't what he wanted. And he was perfect in his direction, because he said, Brad, you're playing the truck and the threat of the truck. That's okay. That's part of it. But I really want you to play the scared mouse, the boy on the motorbike. More energy about that. Because I did something that was more lumbering, because it's big truck. I got the images. Whoever saw that, this semi truck leaping into a canal and all this stuff. Stunts were incredible. So I got kind of caught up in that, and he directed me not totally away from that, but that was one of the biggest kind of course directions he gave me as a director. And it was great, because I was like, great, okay, come back tomorrow. And I redid it. But we worked very kind of quietly together. Sometimes my music editor, Alan Rosen, was there in the room with us, but usually it was just the two of us. And it was different, because I have seen him in other situations later on True Lies. In those films, he was shooting. I never got to the set. I was playing catch up the whole time. Then, but on True Lies, he was shooting the Harrier jets and all that stuff in the area where I lived, basically, or near where I lived. So I got to see him on set. And then in Terminator 2, they mixed it at Skywalker Ranch in Northern California, George Lucas's place. And I'm in Southern California trying to get that reel's music done, and had a courier sitting outside my studio. And I literally would hand him half-inch, 3 tracks, left, center, right, and the 4th track of SMPTE code back in the day. It's all analog still on Terminator 2. And he would literally go get on a plane, fly to Northern California, and get in a car and take it to
Wow.
So I never saw him on that high pressure mix. When we got to True Lies, I saw him in some situations where, when he's working with a lot of people, he knows what he wants. He expects everyone somewhat to read his mind, to really be right on. And I saw him speak in a way that I kind of left the room, because, by then he had somewhat of a reputation, and I just didn't want to engage with that, because I was still working with him the way that we worked, But I got some edge from him when we did True Lies. Was a big change, because it was 110-piece orchestra. And we had always worked in my studio where I had total control. Now we're in Sony, in the big MGM, classic MGM, where they did all the Judy Garland musicals and everything.
Wow.
And we've got this huge orchestra. he's heard the whole thing mocked up in my room on synths, and now he's hearing it with orchestra, and a few things are throwing him off. I had a wonderful conductor orchestrator named Shirley Walker. I'm sure you've probably maybe heard her name, but
No,
she's a was a composer. She's no longer living. She was a composer in her own right, supported young composers, women composers, a really important person kind of behind the scenes. Never really got super famous. She did a number of scores. She did something actually for John Carpenter, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, she was an amazing person with the orchestra. So she would do the conduct. I would sit in the booth with Jim, which was essential because we had no time for him to hear something. Then I come into the booth if I'm conducting. Plus, let's be truthful, I'm not trained as a conductor. There are some guys who go and gals who go out there and kind of conduct, but they're not real conductors. I respect musicians too much. In my early career, I conducted once for that Auschwitz movie, and it was really, I never did it again because I was conducting David Nadian, the first chair violinist for Leonard Bernstein's Philharmonic.
Wow.
Right? And then I kind of realized, no, this is not respectful, really, because I don't know. I know my music. I know what I want to hear, but I'm waving my arms around. You know, my engineer said to me, Brad, you don't have to move your arms so far. Like I literally knew nothing. I knew nothing. So anyway, she conducted for me, and Jim had some comments on that, and he was getting a little nervous because we put our neck out budget-wise to have the big orchestra. But yeah, we worked really, and he had one thing he really didn't like. I used this cymbal sound in there's this fight in a bathroom in True Lies with Arnold and this guy. And I used this kind of cymbal sound. And it was a mistake, really, because I didn't realize he was going really overboard with the metal sounds of the stalls. So it was a clash.
Yeah, clash, yes.
And it's one of the few times he said in that mix, I saw his other side a little bit. And he said, don't ever use that sound in one of my scores again, he said to me. That was like the toughest thing I ever heard from him, which compared to some of the things I heard him saying to the sound effects editor was another story. But I think it comes from passion. It comes from
it's not personal. It's not personal. He didn't want to hit you. Yeah.
It's not personal. But I have to tell you, one of the reasons I'm glad I kind of moved away from that career at a certain point is I have a thin skin. So Hollywood and being a sensitive being is not a great combination.
It is not.
And I started to feel it affecting my health. Anyway, I'm going on and on. I think that's a good answer.
But a good, very good answer. And it's interesting that you mentioned sound design because it's one of the questions we would like to propose. How you deal with sound design, especially in action films. There are a lot of sound designs. I mean, the perfect world would be to receive the cuts with the whole sound design, so you could play with that, to use those sound design that's hit points or complementary things. I mean, try to organize the music together with the sound design, and then they could some kind of synergy could happen between these two sources of sound, because they are all part of the soundtrack. The soundtrack's not just the music, isn't it? I mean, the effects, the foley, the sound designs are always all of these items make part of the soundtrack. And how you deal with that when you are making music to a scene that you know that a lot of sound design will happen?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I know, it's been a while for me, but I know because I see some things, I talk to people, that one of the things they've done is, which to me is kind of scary as a composer, which is their composers are delivering with a lot of isolation, a lot of stems.
Oh, the stems.
So back, I was playing with that because it used to be you recorded the orchestra and you got the orchestra.
Sure.
You know, I mean, on the mixing stage, I started to play with it. What I would do is so we're working mostly on 4-track half-inch tapes, which were then transferred to sprocketed full coat. This is ancient stuff, but full coat stock that they would run, you know, on almost like it looks like a projector, but it's for sound. There's a sound head on it. So we had 3 tracks available. Back then, it was the state of the art was Dolby stereo. So you did left, center, and right, and the surrounds were generated synthetically by the Dolby system. You had to be careful with that. That's a text. That's really nerdy. I won't get into that. But the thing that would happen, well, what I did for Terminator 2, just to have a concrete example, is all the sustained sounds were on one left, center, and right, and all the percussive sounds were on another left, center, right. So those were my stems, which was early on to isolate things like that. Harder to do with a live orchestra, but because I did it all overdubbed in my studio, I was able to give that kind of isolation. So then we had, you know, we're losing the sustained sounds because of the sound effects. You could raise the sustains, but not the percussion, because the percussion might bang into some of the hits. It's automatic weapons or whatever. The other thing is, you know, and I appreciate it sometimes when I see an action movie where the composer's been very thoughtful about what he features in the orchestration at a time when something very percussive is happening on screen, assuming, you know. The biggest problem we had back when I was doing it had a lot to do with, what would you call them? Ambient sounds, sustained motor sounds that would have a pitch. And that's where things got a little crazy sometimes, because the motor's going, and the sustain of the suspense music, the bottom is like in a bad note with that. And if you, as you said, if you didn't have that, we had some devices at that point to pitch shift the sound effect. We didn't have a good enough device to pitch shift them.
Yes, I remember.
But I did work on some films very closely with the sound effects editors. There was a sense of, okay, so it used to be sound effects editors. Then it became sound designers. Okay.
Oh, yeah, right.
So this creative aspect of the field started to open. And then as someone like me, though I did period piece orchestra stuff, when I was in this realm, I always was trying to create new sounds that nobody had ever heard before, you know. I did that a lot in both Terminator films, where, you know, I'd find these crazy ways to create a sound that suggested music, but was coming from another place. And the problem with that was we were crossing over each other. So when the sound effects guys became sound designers, they felt free to be a little more abstract and expressive in their sound effects, which then crossed over the music. And I was being a little bit more sound effectsy.
Yeah, sure.
So, like, for instance, the sound in T2 of the T1000, I think if you didn't really know or hear the score separately, you might think that when you saw the T1000, there was a sound, and you might think it was a sound effect. But in that case, it was music, and it's just kind of it's kind of, you know, whereas the first Terminator had a simple boom, 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 boom. This guy was way more complicated.
Yeah.
It sounded like monks chanting in some weird cave or something, but mechanical. And
how did you do that? How did you do the sound?
It was brass. It was a brass. I was having so much fun with samples because the orchestras were sampling, things were coming out, but I didn't play anything out of the box. So I took that a certain kind of brass. I think, well, I know what I did for the fight scene. I actually, there was a sample of a whole brass section kind of tuning up and playing random things. You know, everybody's playing their own thing in a room where they're getting their lips warmed up. And I played that like 2 octaves lower and frontwards and backwards, and that was part of the when he goes liquid, that's part of what you're hearing. It's a
great
brass group tuning. For the other thing, I think it was just this low trombones and something else, and I might have had some low chant voice in it. I don't even remember. You know, there's a guy recently, his name is Alex Ball. He's a genius in the UK. And someone said, you got to watch this. There's so many covers on the Terminator theme. I mean, bless him. I love it, you know. But I don't usually, someone says, somebody covered the theme. I'm like, one more.
Okay, yeah.
Keyboard. He said, no, you got to see this. The guy deconstructed the entire T2 score.
Wow.
He reverse engineered it. It's brilliant because literally he got Fairlight, because I did it on Fairlight computers, which were not common. He would do something and say this, and then it would play down here and done this to it. And I'm going, right, I remember now, that's how I did it. He was reminding me what I did, because I didn't even, you know, I'm just waking up at 4 a.m. saying, I'm not going to finish on time. I'm not going to finish on time. So I'm just, you know, I'm in like a crisis state. The last 3 weeks was literally 20 hours in the studio, 7 days a week to try to get it done, because they had that summer big film release date. It wasn't changing, and the effects came late to me, but I had to make up the difference. It was wonderful, and I think it's one of the reasons why it probably cut some years off of me film scoring. You know what I'm saying? Just because some synapses got burnt out.
But that's very interesting, this gray area between music and effects. Until which point? What's the point when music is sound effects and when sound effects becomes music? This gray area is very, very interesting, and so I think that nowadays they should. I mean, the composer and the sound designer, they should work together, you know, all the times, because
it's great when there isn't an egos involved in it.
Yes.
And people are not threatened by each other. It works so great. For instance, in you know, a film I did called Fright Night. It was kind of a comedy horror film. Anyway, it was somewhat of a hit, and it's still out there. It's like a cult thing. But this Chris Sarandon becomes the vampire. He's a very cool vampire in a gray leather coat, whatever, and he turns into a bat and he flies. When he flies, I found this thing. I created this thing starting with a sample, but it was like high violins, you know, like almost like bat sounds, whatever. And the sound effects editor had this kind of tuned wind for when he flew, and it worked together. And it was, his alone wouldn't have been as good, mine alone wouldn't have been as good, and they became indistinguishable as this amazing feeling of energy and whooshing of this guy flying, you know.
Cool.
And I had another instance where I did this television film, and it took place in the meatpacking area of New York City. It was a crime drama, but I watched the cut, and they have these things where they take the racks of beef, and they're hanging from a track, and they push them along to the next place where somebody's cutting a piece off or whatever, and it hits these little things, and it made this rhythm. So I said to the sound guy, I'd like to use this in my score. Will you send me a clean sample? He sent me a clean sound of that, and I looped it, and you know, I made a rhythm out of it. And that's where it worked. You know, we were helping each other, and it was, you know, I was happy, he was happy, because it was his sound and it was in the score, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway,
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
it's an interesting area.
Just a second, because now the translator, one of our colleagues is translating. No, it's a professional translator. She has to have a rest to drink some water.
I'm
because
talking fast. I'm
with
from
you,
New York.
I like talking too. I think we are peril. We are very dangerous for
worn her
for
out.
translators. Yeah. Well,
I'm so sorry. So sorry.
no, no way, no way. I think the interview is amazing. I'm having a very good time. But I'd like you guys, you both guys, when you make your phrases now, because I'm gonna translate for the people who is in there now. I'm gonna translate it not simultaneously, but after. And so make the smaller phrase
Got it.
for me it helps me to translate because I'm not a professional. I'm gonna translate the best I can. And go ahead, just I think it's on you, João. You have another question?
Yes, I would like to return to True Lies.
True Lies.
I like very much of the True Lies soundtrack.
Thank you.
I am very curious about how you found the subject, the point that you choiced by the soundtrack, because True Lies is a comedy, True Lies is a spy movie, True Lies is an action movie. Was difficult to find the way for the soundtrack.
I'm gonna translate, sorry. O João está
Yes,
falando.
excuse me, it was very long.
Não, it's okay. O João estava querendo voltar pro True Lies, né? Que eu esqueci o nome desse filme que foi com Arnold Schwarzenegger, né? Esqueci o nome do. Qual foi o nome? Como é que é o nome do filme em português, João?
I think that was True Lies here.
Não é True Lies, não, era outro
No.
nome, mas enfim, então ele comenta que o filme é um filme de ação, o filme é uma comédia, o filme é um filme de espionagem, suspense e tal, não sei o quê. Como é que ele achou, como é que o Brad encontrou esse equilíbrio entre os tipos de música que ele deveria fazer, né? Onde é que ele encontrou esse ponto de equilíbrio? Não é isso, João, mais ou menos?
Isso.
Tá.
O filme foi True Lies no Brasil.
Tá. Foi? Então, ok.
Foi.
Please.
To begin with, I went, and even though I had done the two Terminators, I was asked to come and talk to Jim. It wasn't like he handed me the job. You want me to stop at that or just?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I just don't get you. Could you repeat it because I was distracted with another thing here? Sorry, I'm sorry.
So even though I had worked with Jim Cameron twice before on the two Terminators, when True Lies came along, I think he was wondering if I was the right person for it. So I needed to have a meeting to talk to him about it.
Ok. Ele falou que, mesmo que ele, apesar do fato de ele ter feito os dois Terminators, né, com John Cameron, e o True Lies é um filme de John Cameron também, ele acha, né, o Brad acha que o Cameron ficou um pouco em dúvida se ele seria a pessoa certa, por isso que chamou ele para bater um papo. Go ahead, please.
He said to me, Brad, this is Arnold Schwarzenegger is the lead. He and Jamie Lee Curtis, who's still doing great work.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yes.
So it's Arnold, it's me being Jim, and you again. If people don't know from the first two bars of music that this is something very different than Terminator, we're in trouble.
Ele chamou o Brad para dizer o seguinte, olha só, é o Arnold Schwarzenegger aqui, né? A James Lee Curtis, que fizeram um trabalho maravilhoso realmente, o filme é muito legal. Então ele estava preocupado o seguinte, já que ele já tinha feito os outros, os Terminators, né, que eram Arnold Schwarzenegger, né, e de novo Arnold Schwarzenegger nesse filme, então a associação é grande, né? Então o mesmo diretor, mesmo ator, mesmo compositor, né, o compositor tinha que dar um jeito, né, o caso Brad, tinha que dar um jeito da música no primeiro compasso que a música batesse já fazer uma diferença muito grande, né, para não criar essa sensação de que era alguma coisa que tinha alguma relação com o Terminator. Né? Go ahead.
So this is an example of where it became extremely important that my first attempt be very convincing for him, because he was already having doubts. Okay. Even though, I mean, the good news is he knew other things. I had done comedies before, but not with him. Okay. And I remember going home from that meeting, and I had read the script, and I kind of heard it in my head. And I think I saw a little bit of the movie, or I think I saw a little bit, and I knew that that Arnold and dances a tango. And in the beginning, you know, he's like, he comes up from underwater and he strips off his wetsuit and he's wearing a tuxedo.
Yeah.
That was
remember
a
that.
big. So I'm going to stop there so I don't go too far. But that was a big inspiration for me.
Like an insight, like I got it. Like ele está dizendo então que foram momentos difíceis, né? Porque ele sabia que ele tinha que nas primeiras quando ele fosse mostrar a música pro John Cameron, que ele tinha que acertar de cara, porque senão isso ia gerar mais insegurança nele, né? No diretor. Então ele pegou o filme e levou para casa, né, para poder ver com carinho, com cuidado aquilo tudo, né? E ele viu a primeira cena que é o Arnold Schwarzenegger saindo de dentro da água com uma roupa de borracha, e quando ele tira a roupa de borracha ele está no smoking, né? E aí quando viu essa cena ele falou: entendi o que eu tenho que fazer.
So if you listen to the first piece of music, the main title, before, I don't think you actually see any of this. I think it's just letters at that point. True Lies. But this, I knew where the film was going. The audience doesn't know yet. Okay. So the way I introduce the music, it's a long drum roll, like a snare drum. And then where the Terminator is very heavy, this is dance music, basically. So it goes, and then when he's like in the film, when he's running down the mountainside and he's doing flips and shooting and all this stuff, I tried to make him look like he's dancing with the music. So it was it was kind of psychologically, it helped me make this shift. And I wrote a suite that had like 3 of the main, because this was more complex musically. Okay. Terminator had kind of one
straight, yeah.
Terminator it's complicated in a way, but it's very simple musically. It's not it's actually not a very interesting piece of music in a way. It works, but it's not. Anyway, I'll stop.
Ok. Bom, então, aí quando ele começou a fazer a trilha, ele percebeu que tinha que ser uma coisa ligada à dança. Ele sacou isso, percebeu isso, porque tem uma cena do Arnold Schwarzenegger que ele dança um tango e tal. Então ele foi direto para uma música com muitas cores, sempre uma música que propusesse movimento, né? Então tem as cenas de ação em que ele está fugindo, né? E a bala está comendo, sal. Então a música dele está muito voltada para esse tipo de movimento. Which reminds me your mother dancing and you making music for her to dance. Eu falei que o que me lembrou da história que ele estava contando, de que a mãe dele era bailarina e ele fazia música ao vivo, improvisada para a mãe dançar. Right? Am I right?
You're totally right. And another big influence. So in almost everything I've done, whenever I've talked to people, they say, did you have an influence on this score? And most of the time I go, my influence is what I see on the screen and what I feel about it. That's my influence. This one's different because I realized as it was coming together that another influence from my childhood was very much there, and that's Leonard Bernstein's West Side Story.
Oh.
The dance music in West Side Story, where stuff is kind of serious that's happening, and yet the music is kind of, it swings, you know, it's kind of, it's like Latin dance music at times. And, you know, it has this, it's a way to be there and in a sense be big, have the score be big, you know, and lush. And yet there's a little wink in it. You know, there's like a little, you know, West Side Story is a sad story, but if you listen to that music, it makes you smile, makes you want to.
Yeah. That is an upbeat stuff all time. That's something that proposes and instigates you to move. That is a lot of movement. Yes.
And those parts of True Lies, by the way, are some of my favorite scores, actually, because musically, I just think they're interesting if you know, in combination with the picture and the story.
It is.
It is a nice score.
It is. And if I well recall it, you sound a little Mickey Mousing sometimes. Am I right? I mean, trying to emulate movements and, you know, make.
Well, no, there's stuff that's very that where it gets silly almost. I mean,
yes.
The one place where it wasn't an argument, but Jim and I, I don't know how specific I should be, but there's a scene in the movie where Arnold becomes the jealous husband and uses the FBI and all these troops to come into this trailer where he thinks his wife, Jamie Lee Curtis, is having an affair. And it was a very difficult scene to find the right place for it because it's action. And it was actually, I went back to I went to a real tango and pictured him having like a rose in his teeth as he was.
Oh yeah, like a Latin lover or something like that.
There were things in that movie where I used certain techniques where the music goes and stops, and then the action becomes the punchline to the music. I think that's what you're talking about. It's a little bit Mickey Mouse. It's a bit cartoony, and that's how to keep it light, to keep it in fun.
Fantastic. Yes, we talked yesterday with Harry Gregson Williams. We talked. He came here. Harry Gregson came here to our festival lively, personally, and it's interesting how he uses. He said the same thing. Sometimes he used the music and let the action, let the acting be the complement and the final note of a sequence of notes. Instead of making the last note, he doesn't play the last note and leave the last note to be the acting or sound design or something that you know, because it jumps out of the screen. If you take off the music, the image jumps into your eyes, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, if a film is good, the director, the editor, they have an internal rhythm going, and if you can find that rhythm as a composer, you can put the musical rest. Especially, there's similarity. People don't realize it between scoring for silly comedy and for action and for horror, because the music is manipulating, and sometimes it's kind of obvious what it's doing, where most of the time I like to be not noticed, but there are times where you can be part of the joke. The music can be, you have to be careful not to overdo it. But we did that in True Lies. That was one of the approaches in certain scenes that I enjoyed, finding those little moments.
Cool. Fantastic. João, you wanna ask something?
Do you have mentioned your influences from classic music, from rock, pop music, and do you have some influence of soundtrack composers of the past?
Yes.
Elmer Bernstein.
Bernard Herrmann.
Bernard Herrmann.
Yeah. Well.
So.
Nice.
But not what you might think. Yes, Psycho, right? And Taxi Driver. But as a kid, I watched Twilight Zone.
Oh, yeah, me too. Me too.
And
Yes,
he
me too.
composed, I think, many of them, right? And
Yes.
the story that I heard later was that they had a budget. It was a tight budget, and he could have like 5 musicians
Oh,
or something like that. You know, like 4, 5, 7, but a noticeably small number.
uh-huh.
And it's interesting because later when he chose to limit himself to strings only in Psycho, right? That's kind of a similar thing where he learned how to use limitations to really do something wonderful. In those Twilight Zones, he put the craziest stuff together. Like he'd have a score, I can't quote because my memory's not great about it, but I remember things like timpani, harp, and harmonica
Wow.
or something. You know, he would do
Uh-huh.
these really quirky, and that opened my ears and mind to the idea. I didn't realize it at the time, but it soaked in that the choice of vocabulary musically doesn't always have to be, because at the time that I came in, they used to say TV music especially sounds all the same, basically the same little, you know, either like, you know, whatever, 16 pieces, 32 pieces, whatever the little orchestra was. And people were, oh, are we still doing the translation thing? I'm
No,
going.
no, it's okay. No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
But now the girl's back.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I have to say.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
So what was happening was that people were coming to Hollywood and there was a path.
Sure.
And you came in and you were got the coffee, right? Then you came in and maybe you were an assistant or you wrote a little bit of orchestration. And then maybe you wrote a few cues, you know, before earning. By the time you did that, you were totally immersed in the music as it had been written that you had to sound like in order to move forward. I was very lucky. I came up as this kind of renegade in New York City. I never was in Hollywood. I didn't even know what I was doing, frankly. I was making it up as I went along. I mean, my first orchestra score, I ran to this guy who was teaching me piano, keyboard harmony. And I said, what am I going to do? He said, well, you know what you want to hear. Here's this guy. And he gave me this great orchestrator who listened to me, and I did some little mock-ups, early synths and stuff. And he would tell me things like, you really hear the orchestra. You just need to know that, see right here in this cue, you killed your French horn player 2 years ago because you didn't give him any time to breathe. So anyway, I just was winging it. And that's what I was lucky, because I felt like an outsider, but it's kind of what attracted. Eventually, a TV producer heard some of those scores that I was doing in New York, and he brought me to LA because he said, oh, this is so refreshing. You don't sound like TV music.
Cool.
You know? Now there's not much of a division between television and film because they're big budgets and everything. Yeah, but anyway, that was kind of where my influences were. Working in limited budgets, and you know, I scored this big thing about Auschwitz. It was a 3-hour special, huge project for CBS, the big network at the time. They didn't have any money left by time. I mean, they had Vanessa Redgrave, Jane Alexander, amazing crew cast. And it was a very expensive shoot. And they came to me and said, like, we got no money left. I scored the whole thing with a string quartet and then some weird sounds that I did. So I think that worked really well because it kept it very internalized and didn't romanticize it, kind of. It was more, and the show is basically the movie. By the way, the screenwriter who I got to work with on that show, I'm in my early 20s, Arthur Miller, the playwright, The Crucible, Death of a Salesman. I mean, one of the famous American playwrights in existence. And I'm like buddy working with him.
Great.
So those were these early opportunities, you know. But yes, Bernard Herrmann for sure, and lots of other people, you know, lots of other people. But that
That's
one
nice.
was very unique. His influence was unique on my creative thinking, you know.
Yeah. Talking about
A big
influences,
influence.
you said that you heard a lot of Brazilian music early days. That had some influence on you, or just listening
Yes,
because
no,
you?
I really love Brazilian music. And for my friends, it was not a hip choice at the time because
Yes.
they were rock and roll and whatever. But I really appreciated the kind of gentle rhythms and the harmonics, the voicings on the guitar.
Yes.
I played guitar, and I'm thinking, how did they? What are they doing? It's so cool, you know.
Uh,
And I got to see some Brazilian musicians in New York, and it was a love. It's to this day, it was a love affair. And then some of the more rhythmic. I guess I've never been. I have to come sometime. But Bahia, you know, just different kinds of Brazilian music. But the first stuff was, you know, Astrid Gilberto and
Sons
playing
of Being.
with Carlos Jobim and Stan Getz playing, you know, like Girl from Ipanema and stuff like
It's
that.
fantastic.
And I'll never forget, was it João Jobim?
Antônio Carlos Jobim.
Tom Jobim.
Antonio, okay, so he came to this little club in New York City, and I'd been listening to this guy, right?
Wow.
And I was like, it was the Village Vanguard, which was a big jazz spot. And I went down there, and I'm sitting waiting for him to come on. And there's a stool, and this guy comes on in like a dark suit and tie, which back then, I mean, we're talking the early 70s, you know, hippies, you know. And I thought, oh, he's like
Glasgow stuff.
owns the club, or he's checking, he's doing something because he sat down, he's checking the mic, and he's got like a white shirt and a tie and jacket, and he picks up his guitar and I'm just like, wow, I didn't know a guy who sounds like that could look like that. You know, straight haircut, you know. So anyway, yeah, I have a lot of memories and appreciation for the culture and the music.
For us, it's so
Nice.
marvelous to listen all that. Go ahead, John. Sorry, I cut it you. João?
Well,
I think I cut your talking.
you make soundtrack for a lot of movies, around 100 movies, according IMDb, and the movies for many genres of movies, dramas, comedies, terror movies, science fiction. You have a different process when you make music for a specific genre of movie. You find a different way when you make music for a comedy or for a terror or which the difference for you making music for different genres? Are there some?
No, that it's a boring answer because there's no difference for me.
No, okay, next question.
Yes, good.
No, there's no difference. It's all about watching the movie, taking it in, and
fit it.
Yeah. What comes out, you know. And if I think too much, if I find myself using my intellect too much, I don't trust it. And I have done projects like that where I was thinking about what was right and whatever. Not my best work. My best work was always some kind of like even, you know, some of the, like, I don't watch horror movies. I'm not an audience for them. I got a little bit of a reputation because of some.
Yes.
But it's not my kind of entertainment necessarily, but it's still a story And I think it was Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Love the One You're With. That was the story of my life. It's like once I said yes and I signed on the contract, that was my love. That movie, I had to love it and find what I could do to support it. You know,
Very, very inspiring, very inspiring words, very inspiring words. May I make a little tech question, a little nerd question?
Yeah.
And in Terminator 2, I heard that it was all done with just synthesizers and sequencers, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. But how do you sequence?
No. That's totally wrong.
Yeah, really?
Sorry.
Terminator 1?
My friend Ross Levinson played the electric violin live on that.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. But apart from him, the rest were synthesizers and sequencers.
Yeah, mostly, to differentiate, Terminator 1, I would say synthesizers.
Okay.
Because I had the Fairlight CMI, one of the early, so we're talking now manipulated sounds that originated acoustically. Most of the sounds in Terminator 2 were samples of acoustic recorded things that I then made into my own sounds. But they're not generated from a plug in the wall. They're generated from a room where air moved. So that's part of the heart, where that score has a little more heart, intentionally.
Cool. But how did you do the sync stuff? Because you were recording on tape, and so you had one track with SMTP or FSK. That's the classical way, and so hit play on the
SMPTE code. The complication is I wanted something. I didn't have time to do so much overdubbing, and now it's really easy. Everybody chains all these things together. Didn't happen that way.
I remember.
I had the two Fairlights and I chained them together, but there wasn't a master composition. Now you have it could be your laptop, right?
Yes.
You have whatever, Logic, or I use Digital Performer as your master composition, and it sends the information out to everyone. In Terminator, I had two machines that could lock up in time, but I couldn't write the composition on one.
Oh,
what a nightmare.
You have to play with them together at the same time, all of them together.
So the strings, the sustain, drones, and everything, I'm composing in one piece of software on one machine, and the percussive stuff I'm composing on a different machine. Same kind of software, but they're not talking to each other. The only thing that keeps them together is the SMPTE code. It was so complicated because then if I made a change, I had to make sure it was the same on time-wise on, like I had pieces run away because I didn't count right about how many bars I was changing because the film changed or something happened. It's when I think about it now, I almost get PTSD. It was really, really difficult. And the thing that made it really difficult is I didn't want to record before I was ready and before the film was locked. So I had these compositions in the computers, the two separate computers, and they had to load their library sounds, which back then you can imagine.
I remember.
And
I remember.
Jim Cameron would come and he'd say, "Oh, show me that part," and I'd have to load the composition and then load
half an hour.
And he got frustrated one night. He said, "I don't have time for this." I said, "Jim, I'm working too hard. Don't give me a hassle here."
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's like, and later he said, "I think without the system that you developed to do that score, we wouldn't have made it on time." So he understood. Sure. He understood what was going on there.
It was visionary. Fantastic. Thank you very much for all this info. And it was those times were crazy. MIDI was starting. We didn't have a MIDI full development in 1980 something.
Terminator, I did first Terminator, no MIDI. I think MIDI. It was just starting, but I didn't have it.
Yeah,
I was making machines start like 1, 2, 3, push the button.
Oh yeah, yes. We call it here in Brazil. We made fun with some regions of Brazil here because we say that they are slow, and they made some tricks, and so we called baiano, MIDI baiano, which means a MIDI that comes, you have to press the right buttons at the same
Human
time.
MIDI.
Yeah, human MIDI, MIDI odds or something like that, and it's cool, very much. Well, I think we are running out of time.
This is
There
wonderful.
is a question here, Zeh Netto, do
Oh.
Alexei Kurd.
Oh yeah.
I'll try to do a short answer.
I would like. This is a question of Alexei, composer of the association, that was the conductor of the concert.
Yes.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, he did a good job.
That play your music for Terminator, including. Alexei asked, I would like to know about Brad's new approach to music, showing musicals. Well, will there be another one in the future?
Wow. I don't think there's a short answer to this one. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. I made an interesting discovery, which was that when I stopped, I literally, guys, I don't know if you even realize this, but the last time I wrote for media was 2000, over 20 years ago. Since then, I've written 4 musicals. One was for animation. One was very autobiographical. Anyway, I've written 4 musicals: book, lyrics, and music, the whole thing. And actually, the animated musical was close to being produced, but it was an original story, and it was all about Disney at that point and stories that people already knew, fairy tales. It's a lot of work, and I think I'm a pretty creative person, and I think I have some interesting things that I've done, but I'm not a producer. I'm not someone who knows how to get things into the world. Very different thing. And it's not just me. Anybody in theater right now will tell you it's a very difficult time for new work. So I'm not sure if I'm going to do another one. I mean, there's something that I did called, if you go online, I released this right in the beginning of COVID. And if you go online, I think I don't have the YouTube link, but if you go online and you search Brad Fiedel's Full Circle.
Full Circle.
FULL, Brad, but you need my name because there are other things I've
okay.
And it's a YouTube. There's just a cover shot. There's no video. But
how you call that? Brad Fiedel's? What the name of the
Full Circle.
Full Circle.
It's a complete musical. I don't know, it's almost 2 hours or something like that. And it's just one shot on screen. It's not video. It's audio only. It's like listening to a book on tape, but it's a full musical with lyrics, narration, whatever. That's my most recent work. So I don't know if that's what he's referring to, whether he got a hold of that. I'm not sure at this point, what I'm going to do in the future. It's hard to put years into a project like that and then have it not get to the public. There's maybe a few thousand people who have watched that online, and I can see, because the analytics, many people sign on and they're gone very quickly because it's not Brad Fiedel, the Terminator.
Okay.
So my audience, there's a lot of people that know me and care about the Terminator specifically. I really appreciate that all of you've been familiar with the other work, but it's rare. Again, people think the Terminator is the Terminator. So this stuff is completely different than the Terminator. And I think people listen, and the audience that's coming in to listen to that is drawn by my name in connection to what I've done in the past. So I'm not sure if there's a market for what, and I'm not looking to make money on this stuff. I just want people to experience it. If you're an artist, and you make a painting and nobody ever sees it, it kind of feels like, I don't know. So I'm not sure. If I get inspired, I will do it. Yeah.
That's very interesting because I heard a little piece of the music you showed us. It's completely different, really. It has nothing to do with Terminator and stuff.
Mm-mm.
Cool.
No, it's a story. Full Circles is a story that was inspired by my grandfather, who grew up in Eastern Europe, and it deals with, in a sense, a tangential part of the Holocaust and gypsies, and it's a very, very different piece. But people who have listened through have really enjoyed it.
Cool.
Yes.
Cool. Well, my friends, I think we are running out of time. I'm very happy. I'm very happy to make your acquaintance, and I look forward to see you again. And maybe see you here in Brazil next time.
Oh, I would love to be there. It's on my bucket list. I'm surprised that I got to be this age and I haven't checked that one off yet, visiting Brazil.
Oh, shame on you. Come on.
Really.
Come on. We'll be here.
Really,
We'll be here.
really, really. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate your questions and your thoughtfulness. It was a wonderful experience to talk to you.
See you
Thanks
next
for
time.
participating in the festival. Thanks for tell to us about your very wonderful experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you next time.
See you next time.